distinction lies, yeah? What does the word
What do you
actually
mean by that?
Yeah. So, for example, where it says whether it's kings or rulers, as you rightly pointed out, is it talking about sovereign authority, or is it talking about the chief or the next village?
Even if it is sovereign rulers, let's take a very restricted definition, even if it is purely sovereign rulers, who weren't even emperors, they went by the title king, Basileus in Greek, or Melech in Greek.
Yeah.
Even if we're very restrictive about that, at that time, as the Christian movement spread, I find it very feasible to imagine that most of the kings in that environment would have heard about it.
I have no problem.
So whenever they hear about the religion, Christianity, they would say, well, who is Christ?
I have no problem with that. But here is where my contention earlier on was about prophecy and how it needs to be defined. Yeah? So maybe perhaps we should do that. From your perspective, what is the definition of a prophecy?
Very good question. And this issue comes up in lots of speakers' corner. So a prophecy is not necessarily about the future. It's not necessarily a prediction. Prophecies can often just be, I would say at its core, prophecy is communication from God to humans, and it can be about contemporary events, not always about the future.
Right, okay. Now, is it your personal view?
Yeah.
It is.
I would say that is my personal view. I believe that is kind of the mainstream academic understanding, but I'm happy to be corrected.
Right, okay. So let's follow that. If we do not take prophecies to be fulfilled literally, yes, then there is a potential, as I said earlier on, for us to be able to interpret into a prophecy what we think fits.
That's true, but I'm not sure why
So
can I say, before we go down that path, I'm not sure we need to go down that path because so far I've not needed to interpret anything.
Okay.
Let's not go there unless we have to.
Okay, let me give you an example. Going to Isaiah 53. If you go to verses 10, 11, and 12.
Yeah.
Just read them.
Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him with pain. When you make his life an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days.
Stop. He shall see his offspring, and the Lord shall prolong his days. What does that mean?
That's a tough one. Maybe offspring here might be non-literal. Maybe that is referring to those who are born of the Spirit by his ministry.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
The verse actually talks about, and the word used is seed. What is a seed in biblical understanding?
Well, a seed is often physical offspring. Seed is also used to refer to kind of the seed of woman who crushed the serpent in Genesis 3:15.
So what is that seed?
Sorry?
What is that seed?
Well, Christians often say maybe that's referring to the Christ. So, well, there you go.
But we know that throughout the Bible, when the word seed is used, as you rightly pointed out, it is talking about offspring. Now the question is, where Isaiah 53, verse 11 and 12, is talking about how he shall see his offspring and his days shall be prolonged. Now, when it says his days shall be prolonged, from what?
So I think by this point the suffering servant has already died. He's already been cut off from the land of the living. So I think this is part of the reference to his resurrection. Although his life was prematurely cut short, his days will be prolonged because he will be resurrected to eternal life.
I would suggest that perhaps here belief has entered in. And what I mean by that is, you see, if it's talking about after his death, then the question of prolonging his days doesn't apply. The very reason, if you look at the biblical understanding, when he was asked, Master, there are 7 husbands and 1 wife, yeah, after the resurrection,
Talking with the Sadducees.
okay, and what does he say?
Sorry, I got distracted. What does he say? In the resurrection, there won't be marriage, will be like the angels.
Right. Paul in Corinthians goes a bit further. He says, if it is sown a physical body, it is resurrected a spiritual. Now, we know also from Romans that wants to die after the resurrection. The question we have to ask ourselves is, if this is what you are suggesting, is referring to perhaps after death, yes? Does the prophecy now also include post-resurrection elements?
Well, I'm saying I think it is referring to a resurrection.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's go with that one then. Why does it say him having offspring?
I'm not sure. As I said, the best thing I can
fine,
think of off the top of my head is that it is referring to those who benefit from the saving activity, because Christians are called the sons of God. We become co-sons of God along with Jesus, and so on.
Right.
And actually, in the context, because the whole context is talking about the fruit of his suffering, how this will be vicarious, how this will be atoning for other people. The idea that in Isaiah 53, and I'd be happy to get there.
Yeah.
So actually, the interpretation, although it is symbolic and figurative, the idea that it is talking about the spiritual offspring of his labours, although it might linguistically be a bit harder, it might actually fit the context better than referring to physical offspring, who thus far have not been mentioned, arguably are less relevant.
Right. But you would have to agree with me on this, in this particular instance, that you are trying your best to understand what it actually means for what you know. It wasn't something you really had considered before.
I've considered it in the past and thought, that's a bit of a tricky one, and never got distracted.
Okay, not to worry. That's normal. But the fact is that we are looking at only one of these many prophecies that you said gave you the leaning towards why you are a Christian. Okay?
And can I just say, with this one, while I do recognise this particular verse is a bit of a difficult one, I think the weight of the rest of the passage still leads me to consider that it is Jesus. You know, if it was just this verse, I wouldn't apply it.
That is fine. The problem, and I can see
I'm
your
sorry,
angle.
we're going to keep it this for now, maybe later.
Thank you. I can see your angle, okay? And that is what interests me. Because if, for example, out of 10 verses we have, if 2 of them...
I mean, just to say, sorry, it is out of 15.
Okay, let's say out of 15. If you look at 2 verses, which basically are flying in the face of the whole story...
Sorry, I don't see a...
I'll go with 2.
I'm not sure I see a problem in 11.
Well, I found the 2 there. No, 11, 12, if you go. He talks about, we are here on yeah, here we have, yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him with pain. 10. When you make his life an offering for sin. Now, if you read this, yet it was the will of the Lord, third party, when you make his life an offering for sin. Who is talking here?
Could now be addressing God?
It could be, but we'll just take it further. You see,
I assume it is. Yeah.
Well, let's go. He shall see his offspring, and shall prolong his days.
So he shall see his offspring. I believe we are now talking about the suffering servant of Isaiah 53.
So would it be Jesus?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just go back to the point though of 2 verses? So you're saying 2 verses. So far, I'm only accepting there's difficulty within
No
one
problem.
verse.
I don't mind.
That's fine, but I'm just clarifying
I
for those listening. And of that verse, I actually don't see any difficulty. In fact, it fits really nicely. 3/4 of it. It's a quarter of a verse that I'm finding problematic.
I agree with you, and I'm glad you're being honest. If we look at it, I can agree with you about the rest, but my contention would be, if we look at these particular verses, and where it clearly saying he shall see his offspring, yeah, the word offspring is used, he shall see his seed, okay? Now when, like I said, in the whole of the Bible, you look at it, when it talks about the word seed, or it uses the word seed, almost inevitably it is talking about physical offspring, okay? Now, the question that we are trying to address here is this. If 2 verses out of 15, as you are saying, are somewhat problematic.
I'm not saying that.
Okay, what are you saying?
I'm saying that a quarter of a verse out of 15 is problematic.
A quarter of a verse.
Okay.
A quarter of a verse is problematic. Okay, Richard?
Sorry.
No problem. I have no issue with that. But the thrust of this is that the whole of the chapter is talking about the suffering servant.
Yes.
And that is associated with Jesus Christ. But if it is associated with the man Jesus Christ, okay, and he talks about physical offspring and the prolonging of his days, then one has to reconsider how one is looking at the prophecy. So, for example, if I were to say, and it's common amongst Speaker's Corner, and you'll see many videos also, there is a contention that when the formulation of the Bible was undertaken, there were many books which were considered to be apocryphal. Okay? But a lot of those apocryphal books, yes, seem to contain information which may have suggested that the way the storyline has been given in the Bible may not necessarily have happened. So, for example, we say Jesus Christ is mentioned here as the suffering servant. It is basically literally prophesying his suffering and crucifixion and subsequent death. But now I'm saying to you, okay, wait a minute, no problem, I have no issue with that. But if we assess this carefully, we are finding things are not entirely fitting the way we thought they should. So what should we do in the circumstances? So if you look at your quota amount of 15, okay, I'm saying, look, I can agree with you, but the problem is this, that it is, in that quota, it is addressing something completely fundamental to the very individual we are discussing. So, if X, for example, sorry to use you as an example.
No worries.
Yeah, if X here tells you, Richard, Shabir has got 10 sons, I'll be happy. But then somebody else comes and says, Richard, Shabir has only got 2 sons. What would you think?
Maybe one of them's confused, maybe they're talking about 2 different people.
Okay, let's say me, Shabir Yusuf, he talks about, yeah? What would you think if one gave you 10 and one gave you 2?
Say one of them's got it wrong.
One of them got it wrong. Or possibly, both of them are correct, except the guy who met me with 2 did not subsequently find out at another age.
I suppose.
There's a possibility, isn't there? But what happens now is this. For me, to establish if somebody questions the validity of when I am the father to 10 sons or to 3 sons, I would have to have some evidence to prove either one of the 2. Okay? I am saying if it's fundamental to the individual, in this case Jesus Christ, then we need to know why in a prophecy which is supposedly talking about his suffering, crucifixion, subsequent death, why has this been introduced where it talks about the potential of him having children and also seeing his life extended?
I might be missing something. I mean, I'm not sure we've made a new point really.
No, not at all.
I guess I would just
regurgitating.
Sure, I guess I would just reiterate. I'm sorry, I might ask you further something in a minute. I might just reiterate that it is a bit of a tricky verse.
No problem.
But the rest of it fits Jesus so nicely. I still think that's a good interpretation. But also, although it is preferable to try and find a literal interpretation of something first, if that fits, a symbolic one is given extra credibility by the context.